Trying to choose Chopin's best piece is a little bit like asking a parent to pick their favorite child. It's not right to have to choose. So the best answer is usually that each is wonderful in their own unique ways. But when pressed on the issue, pianists and aficionados will tend to narrow down the candidates for best Chopin piece to a small handful. Usually later works like the F minor Ballade or Third Sonata, Polonaise Fantasy, and especially the Barcarolle. Now, one's journey with Chopin doesn't usually start this way. At least when I was younger, it was probably some of the darker and more dramatic works, like the G minor Ballade or C minor Nocturne, that I would have ranked the highest. But the older I get, the more the Barcarolle speaks to me. Chopin never went to Venice, but this gondola song in F-sharp major is worth 1,000 trips to the enchanted island city. It's a tale of love and loss, a hero's journey, with scenes narrated from everyday life that are elevated to a world beyond our experience. Welcome to the Chopin Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Laude, and over the course of this 16-part series, we'll be diving deep into the music of Frédéric Chopin, with episodes on each of Chopin's major compositional genres. This is episode 9, covering the Fantasy, Berceuse, and Barcarolle. In this episode, pianist Garrick Ohlsson pushes his oar through these 3 singular masterworks. And we'll be joined by special guest Eric Liu, who won the gold medal at the 2015 US National Chopin Competition, before taking 4th prize at the International Chopin Competition later that year. And finally, music critic Jed Distler will recommend some very special recordings of the Fantasy, Berceuse, and Barcarolle from the past century. You can listen to full episodes of the Chopin Podcast on podcasting platforms the day of release, or watch video segments from each episode in the following days as they're posted to my YouTube channel. Just look up my name, Ben Laude. That's BenLaude. This podcast is produced in partnership with the Chopin Foundation of the United States, which is presenting the 11th National Chopin Competition in Miami in January 2025. Follow the link in the description to reserve your tickets to the live rounds, and make sure to subscribe to the Chopin Foundation YouTube channel, where you can watch yours truly hosting the competition live streams from Miami. The honorary chairman of the US Chopin Foundation is none other than Garrick Ohlsson, who will be with us every step of the way during this podcast series. To this day, Garrick is the only pianist from the United States ever to win 1st prize at the International Chopin Competition. And in October 2025, he will become the first ever non-Pole to chair the competition in Warsaw. Garrick is one of the few pianists ever to record Chopin's complete works, published by the Hyperion label, and many of the recordings heard during this series are taken from that set. Digital downloads of the complete cycle are available for purchase on Hyperion's website. And among these complete works by Chopin, Garrick has on more than one occasion called the Barcarolle his favorite. So it was a privilege to join Garrick in his gondola and explore the waters of this inspired piece.
There's a lot going on in this piece. I got very attached to individual moments, but I didn't get attached to the whole thing until it had been living inside of me for a couple of years. And of course, the first thing I fell for was the sfogato. Then, as you know, I very proudly was happy to play at the Chopin competition in the first round. And by that point, I was so mad about it. It was my favorite thing to play and work on. And one of the most endless pieces to work on. I mean, it's first of all, it's very difficult, tricky. I mean, it's in all ways.
What an awful piece to have to learn fast. But I sort of only had a few months to prepare it for a Juilliard recital. And I never properly revisited it. And I have to say, I faked my way through the grand finale, because just the left hand was killing me.
That was the section that Olga had me learn first as a left-hand solo. She was like a Marine trainer on those things, and I had to play that section for her as a performance before we even did any of the rest of it.
May I challenge you to pretend you're with Miss Berabini again?
Oh my God.
You're in a lesson and you've brought your left hand for us. Can you make music out of just the left hand?
I'll try,
section?
and
okay.
I haven't essayed this for a while. Not so easy. That wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible.
Talk about some of the spots that do really throw hurdles at the left hand and how one might resolve them.
Enormously ones.
Yeah.
Well, probably in slow motion. Make sure you get there. That's another trick I like to teach is don't try to play it in tempo. Just give yourself enough time to get there with the right sound. If it's too slow, that's all right, even if you need to take more time. But still feel the music pulling forward, even if you're taking time, and eventually... Well, that got fixed already, but I can't tell you how many times I've practiced that in my life.
I've been sitting here with your complete Chopin, which means every one of those pieces you had to practice, which means every one of those pieces just about you had to practice a lot, or most of them had to practice a lot. And certainly ones like this, you've spent a lot of time on. The rewards are so far in the future with piano because you have to start with the drudgery of just getting anywhere on the instrument. But it's like each time you stick with it, each month, each year, each whatever phase of your life that you can stick with it, the rewards seem to accumulate in ways that are unbounded. Would you say that's true? Where it's like, okay, you had to put a lot of hard work in as a teenager, but then in your 20s, it turned into something quite nice. In your 30s, it was glorious. In your 40s, it was on another plane. Well, is this something you experience where, wow, it just keeps growing and growing?
Very much so. And the reward system involved in doing this work well is so immense. I mean, I remember all my teachers when I was younger said, oh, every time I come back to this Beethoven sonata, I see something new. And I thought, what could there possibly be? But I feel the same way now. But I also see designs, structure, dramaturgy much more clearly than I could have possibly. I don't mean to sound arrogant about this. Some people have better recall of all this stuff than others. Some people can learn faster. I'm not the fastest learner in my group at Juilliard, which is a pretty good group of people, or Juilliard is always a good group of people. I was not the fastest learner, but I was one of the faster learners. And I didn't have the best memory at school, but I had one of the better memories. And there were marvelous players at Juilliard and marvelous artists who learn slowly and who have to really work hard to retain things. And of course, you can look at the freak heroes of the piano world, like, say, Joseph Hoffman, who apparently could, according to Madame Levine, heard Joseph Levine play an encore for him at home that he had never heard. And he winked at them from stage and played it the next night. He could just do it. Well, I think Saint-Saëns was like that. I think Mozart was like that. they're what we would call freaks.
I used to wonder how the stories of Saint-Saëns' sight reading could have been possible.
Yeah.
Because how do you reduce a full score on the spot? You just can't see it. And then I realized, because they're not just reading, they're doing also what Hoffman did when he played by ear. Both are happening at the same time, where they're assimilating what must be the way this music goes from a couple of cues that they see, and immediately turning it into more or less either what they just heard or what they just saw. And I think you have a version of that, just the fact that you're able to retain the amount of music you have. And you certainly know what I'm talking about, the way that you can hold this immediacy of the way something looks and to the way it sounds to the way it feels. And then to be able to associate that with new instances of it that are similar. And then you build castles out of the same stones. And it's like, okay, I know this castle, even though I've never seen it. But you're right, to do it by ear is another level, but you're still using that. You're utilizing that on some level.
And I think all musicians have different talents within, musical talents. And some have more acute ears, and I have a pretty good one. Once again, I'm not one of those people who could, take Boulez down by dictation. I suppose there are a couple of people who can do that, and that's just an absurd example. But I think everybody has a different combination of those elements. And some people struggle much more with just the instrumentality, even among really wonderful people.
God, we might just need to have a regular podcast, not just a Chopin podcast.
I'd like to begin with the beginning of the Barcarolle already.
Shall we go back to the beginning?
I think the beginning is a good place to begin.
Shall we finally start our segment on the Barcarolle?
Okay, let me just be the professorial type again, which I default to occasionally. It's a 2.5 bar introduction with a little bit of rest, but it's all based on a 5/7 chord, which has in it, on top of it, the additional notes of the 9th, the 13th. Sounds like Scriabin, doesn't it? All these notes fit into that. I'm going to leave the pedal down. That's pretty cool stuff. So with a good student, I would say I want to hear the middle voice, maybe exclusively, but still play the other ones. And do similarly for the top voice and for the bottom, which is really two things, because you have a C-sharp pedal plus. There's a lot going on here, but it's basically all intro, right? It's like he's opening the curtain onto this Venetian scene, if you will.
It's just 5.
Yeah, it's just 5 with... But nobody, whenever he wrote this piece in 45/6, nobody wrote that kind of sound then. And he ends on the double dissonance, so that you as a performer, even if you don't know what to do with the whole introduction, once you get here... You've got to. There's a right and wrong moment to begin the little, boat song accompaniment, which he gives you, because if you come too soon or too late, and that depends on how you played it before. If you've retarded a little bit, it will feel right when you do it. If you don't, but it's not just a matter of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inside of yourself. You have to feel this large rhythm. Venice, where Chopin never was. But I've been there several times in my life, and it is one of the most magical places on earth. Venice was a great empire, and its traders and its military and its political structure went all over the Eastern Mediterranean. And the Eastern Mediterranean for Europeans, all the way to Constantinople, that's foreign, that's exotic. That's where you see funny people wearing funny clothes, eating funny food, funny perfume, funny dyes. Everything is exotic and different. And all those people were on the docks in Venice. So Venice was a place crammed with exoticism. We're no longer so subject to it because we have this huge world and we have the internet now. But then if you just look at the paintings that Chopin might have seen reproduced, or even in Warsaw by Canaletto's nephew, who painted in a photographic style, very, 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 very precise, and yet contained what we would call the seeds of Impressionism, because it all shimmers. All of this stuff shimmers the way that Venice shimmers, and so does this piece. So this, people in Venice probably were used to much more vivid, brighter combinations of colors in their paintings, in their architecture, in their colorings, than, let us say, the penitential Scandinavians of 1500 or whatever.
And it's in the legacy of Venetian art, or art about Venice. There's obviously romance, but there's also mystery and intrigue and sometimes death and murder. What is it about this enchanted floating city, right? I guess the foundation itself is this marvel of civil engineering, but it's truly the most romantic place, even as its own physical existence is just not part of this world.
Completely unlikely. It's the triumph of the imagination and artistic impulse over practical considerations, and as many have, it's been observed many times, it's a fantasy. It's a concrete fantasy. It's a fantasy come to life, like practically no place on this planet. In any case, I don't even know what it all meant to Chopin, but somehow he chose this Venetian Barcarolle boat song idea. And one of the things I like to say, and this has to do with that tricky subject called rubato, even this figure 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Once again, speaking of metaphor and teachers teaching you stuff, my teacher Olga, who was Italian, and said, when you go to Venice, look at these gondolas. A gondola is a funny, beautiful, morbid black boat, which is curved so that one person can row it by staying on one side and it still goes straight ahead. It has a flow. It has a tidal. It has a flow, and even the movement of the gondolier in it is you have to use your whole body with it. It goes into it. And she said, so we can't start da 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 da. And how brilliantly clever his own pedaling is. He puts these 3 notes on one pedal, then dry. So you need a little something on that. It shouldn't sound like... Well, that takes a lot of practice too.
He's like saying the A sharp should soar over the middle of the bar and connect to the next G sharp.
That's one of the things that's happening. So it's not a straightforward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 either. And this has to go on through the whole opening section. Your cello has to be really admirable, and your gondolier has to be admirable. And I don't know how to tell you how to do it because I haven't figured it out myself.
It's one of those things where there are no words for how to do it. You just have to find it.
There are no words. And then, you see, we are 5 bars into this piece. We've already uncovered about 50 miracles. Then the song starts. And it's not one of his most operatic, nocturne-y, passionate song. It's a casual song for 2 singers. Sort of, what did I say? Look at his dynamization, which I did not understand when I was young, and I don't think I fully understand it now, but at least I have an idea. And I will credit what Seymour Bernstein talks about is this idea that when you have these hairpins down or up, sometimes it's also not a Godric. I never am sure what that word means, but it's partially an expressive thing. In other words, obviously in normal music, the most expressive thing in bars 6 and 7 would be that would be very natural. would be the normal musical thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But Chopin starts la,
And then it quickens.
Yeah, exactly. But in order to sing that first note beautifully, you need to have a big breath and be well prepared. You just can't go. So the emotional energy you have to gather before you actually play that note. You've got to do something special about it, and it can't be exactly in time, and it can't be so drunk that it makes you sick.
It's crazy. You just solved a huge problem for young pianists learning this expressively, is that they think the wider intervals are expressive intervals, but what you're saying is, and it sounds so much better this way, no, move through them. When you're on the small parts of the hairpin, flow, just go.
Exactly.
And then expand. So start expanded, then move, then expand again at the key change.
Yes, which you rarely hear, even in very good performances, even in my own okay performances of it. I don't think when I was younger I really got it. But also, by the way, speaking of the wider interval, we all know that once singing gets past the truly classic style into Romanticism and into modernism and even into pop music, how often you hear, and in Italian opera, by the way, how often you hear a fine singer take a high note, not as da 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 ya da da ya da da. They actually do the opposite. Da da ya da da ya da da. You almost croon it a little bit, you know. You sort of do it backwards, and then, of course, the opposite thing happens. And I hope Mr. Bernstein would forgive me or approve. It actually expands, but it doesn't expand aggressively. It's like taking in a breath.
It's so revealing. If you follow the hairpins as about time and expansion and contraction of time and not dynamics, it makes the whole first part make sense. It really does.
Exactly. And then it gets that, what I think my teacher Olga was trying to get at was that sense of that organic body rhythm in the water with the boat and with the singers and everybody sort of doing their stuff together. It's still immensely complicated, and it doesn't mean that if you pay attention to things, you're still going to have about 15 choices per bar as to how exactly to accomplish that. Just appreciate what the left hand is doing, because for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars, we're anchored on F sharp. And I'll cut forward. And now suddenly we're going somewhere else. And oh wait, whatever.
Ya-dee-da, da-dee-da.
Magic.
Yeah. I mean, every bar is seemingly the most beautiful bar of the piece, but measure 20 is another one of them.
Yep, there's another one. This is almost impossible to do, but you've got to at least make the ear believe that you're hearing this. There's probably going to be a little loss of perfection in your trill somewhere.
You have to be a pickpocket. I have to distract you with this while I'm reaching around behind you and pulling out your wallet.
Brilliant. Yes, you have a left hand too to help. So I'm going to see if I can make it up. Well, that was lousy. Well, something like that. I mean, the trouble is I'm self-conscious about it right now. And of course, in a concert, it doesn't have to be the platonic ideal. You just have to let the music be heard. I love it. Pickpocket. Wow.
Yeah, and now he's going to modulate back to F sharp with the most incredible double trill, just stacking trills on top of us.
Yes.
What kind of song are these two lovebirds singing? I mean, at first it started so charming and innocent and flirty and doting, and now it's already this sort of, it's a saga.
Yeah, two singers talking. They're pretty excited and they're warbling.
I'm like going to immediately run and relearn this piece the moment we hang up. That's what
Yes. And he stayed on A sharp for 4 bars. And finally. And he ornaments. Another one. That's astounding.
Jeez.
Just as music. Wow.
God, every detail.
And if that isn't the most beautiful thing, look what happens immediately following. Where the singers pick up. I mean, isn't that?
I didn't think of that. That's nice.
And if you like Mozart, if you like that, watch what happens next. Oh, we have to go on.
It's like they got their arm around the gondolier now, and they're all friends, and they're all singing together, and
they're quite drunk or whatever, and then suddenly, oh wow! Look at all the stars in the sky.
Well, then it's like, okay, by the way, we're on a boat. You got to keep rowing. Oh yeah, ba, ba.
Oh God, I think we need to do 10 podcasts on this piece.
The next podcast won't be Beethoven. It'll be the Chopin Barcarolle podcast with one episode for each measure of the piece.
Anyway, then he closes off rather nicely, more formal. 5-1, 5-1, 5, and then he switches to F sharp minor, and now comes, I think, 4 of the most extraordinary bars in the piece. He's had probably the most highly decorated piano piece in the history of literature, I bet, up to this point.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more stuff going. There are more jewels in different colors in this opening than I think probably has been written, even by him. Up to
there's
this
a lot
point.
of buried treasure in underneath the water, you know.
And suddenly he gives you 4 bars of nothing at a faster tempo. And almost doesn't touch the note A, except when he can't avoid it, until we're no longer playing the harpsichord, that's for sure. So he uses this as a transition to get into what I call theme group B, which is a slight più mosso from this. But then we have stuff which starts to recapitulate this movement from the.
Oh, yeah.
We have this as an ostinato, which turns into more than an ostinato, and then we have this kind of wandering.
Wandering is right, because let me just pause you there, because it's important to mention, I think, this is not a duet anymore. Of course, there's 2 parts in the right hand that are incredible, but the inner part is actually accompaniment now. There's
That's right.
one of the lovers, or whatever your narrative is, has wandered off through with the exotic, weird F sharp minor moment. They're by themselves now. There's a loneliness to this section. This song is being sung alone now.
By one person, yeah.
Yes.
And there is occasional commentary.
Yeah, but that could be an inner thought. That could be the gondolier saying it's going to be all right, man. Don't worry. It's
This is not a duet anymore.
it's
No.
not lovers, at least, anymore.
No, it's one singer with two accompanists. And wow. Now he's experimenting, and in the opening we were pointing out that practically every bar there's some radical thing which happens. Here he doesn't do it except for harmonically occasionally. Same harmony. And there he sings. And now we're here for a long time again. So he's making really long harmonic arcs. And then he does go back to Spain or to the Moorish lands. So the Ravel chord.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously influenced by Ravel. But actually, everybody's known about this chord for a lot, but no, people didn't use it as much. Bach certainly used it too. It just didn't sound like it comes from Venice or Granada when Bach uses it.
And even though it's alone and there's a sense of longing and yearning and maybe missing one's companion, there's a sense of hope and well, at least the foreshadowing of triumph. The return to A major, the trilling. For all the melancholy of Chopin, there's a hopefulness about this piece.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And it ends without tragedy.
Yeah.
Not without pain, but not in tragedy at all.
By the way, so does the Polonaise Fantasy. It's almost like he'd written away his tragedies.
It's true. Yeah.
The late works, he's finding a new kind of, I don't know, contentment sorry, this is a whole other podcast, but returning to the Barcarolle now. But
I hadn't thought about that, but just think in sequence. And this and the Polonaise Fantasy, of course, conveniently ignoring some mazurkas at the time.
It's not like things got necessarily that much better in his life. His relationships are troubled. He's getting sicker. But he's also getting older and maybe a little bit wiser, even though the man never lived to 40. There could be more. Well, there's more complex feelings.
Well, yeah, and Charles Rosen points out very well in his book on Romanticism that Chopin, like Mozart, got much more complex as he got older and not so facile. I mean, Chopin was nothing if not facile when he was young, and this piece does not speak of lack of facility, but it's not a facile piece. It's there really are earlier pieces of Chopin which are much lighter emotionally and much less profound, as beautiful as they are. Okay, anyway, so you get this thing which you've heard out, then it decides to get big. But then it goes to theme group C. I need a blackboard to be. Now, pay attention, class. We have theme group C. We go into a yet slightly faster theme, and this becomes the theme that will have its apotheosis in the climax. Which is mostly, I would say this is the least extraordinary of the themes of the piece, in the sense that it's a bit more like a sort of Mediterranean pop song or maybe a boat song. I don't think it's not fantastic. I just think in its place it's amazing, and it's mostly over a pedal point. It's less complex. It's got glorious texture in it, and then it does something which people interpret differently. It comes to an end without quite coming to an end. We like to go to sleep, but he's got better plans for us.
Just the fact that this seemingly mundane theme, maybe not even sung by the hero or our protagonist, maybe it's just heard by somebody on the land who's passing by.
Yeah, it's like an offstage group of people singing.
Yeah, it's a little trio or quartet or something, and there's something maybe that becomes an earworm in our hero's journey, because of course it's going to come back and be the most important climactic thing. And it's almost like you heard it in passing first and didn't realize it yet, how important this tune is making you feel.
Yeah.
So what happens then?
Another trill, but what's this one? We're back to a single singer, I think. And it's a trill on E and F sharp. And so where's it going to lead? Right? Isn't that what trills do? But rarely do they go. He ends it on a wrong note, and with the most beautiful curlicue. Now this curlicue alone. Wow.
There's a whole podcast episode on those that little curlicue that.
But the accompaniment is extraordinary, and as John Rake often points out, this doesn't suggest it directly, but it implies a kind of a strumming. This thing. Sort of mandolin-y, blum, blum, blum. It's not chomp, 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 chomp. But in any case, this is an accompaniment with individual singer who's a little bit stuck in that almost the way that, Arabic-influenced music in Spain is.
Yeah.
That sort of wail.
Absolutely.
That sort of wail. And it wails harmonically. Dissonant. The harmonies are incredible. That's incredible. And it sinks down, it finally finds itself. And before the very best part of this very best of all pieces happens, which is the Dolce sfogato, which is a universally admired section, you have a little intro to it. That couldn't be simpler. Then he makes it more complicated. In these 4 bars, who was it who wrote that this is where the lovers kiss? I don't know. Awfully romanticized.
I don't believe that anymore, because I'm now hearing, here's what you've got me, here's where I'm at right now, Garrick, because it's all happening right now. So this is a hero's journey. We have a, initial exposition, it's either a memory of the lovers. In any case, there's that first departure. And now we've been in an unfamiliar world. The hero is just taking in and learning to navigate this. Finally, we reach C sharp major. And it's ultimately going to serve as the dominant, but it's the first time it feels like a tonic, if we're going to get music theory. We've actually arrived in the key of C sharp major.
Oh, we have.
And this initiates what will be the heroic return, the extended heroic return. Finally, there's a beginning of a sense of return to the familiar with a new sense of the world is transformed, right?
Which will, of course, mirror this.
Yes.
Going to F sharp, yeah. Absolutely. He stays on it and does, as I say, the most Chopinist thing he ever wrote. That's the swooniest thing in all of music.
Sfogato, just a moment on this term. What does it mean? What do you make of it?
Oh, you go first.
In bar 78, Chopin tells the player, Dolce sfogato. The direction is so unique, it had André Gide leading himself to ask, has any other composer than Chopin ever used this word to describe his piano music? And of course, Alan Walker, the great Liszt biographer, chimes in. Well, it turns out the answer is yes, but we know of only one example. It occurs in Liszt's 14th Hungarian Rhapsody, where you should let loose in a very different way.
I have asked many Italian speakers, including my teacher, Olga, who would talk about sfogato for 15 minutes and how it was completely untranslatable into English, of course, and words in different languages are like that. But it's often an unburdening in other words, you unburden your soul and you lighten. But here is certainly the singer, and this is a coloratura singer, is free. This is not free. You can do rubatismo if you want to. Yeah, that bird is flying freely, isn't it?
I've got it. It is the return of the lover. You've gone and you've experienced other things. You've left this person behind. You have memories of them. Some of your experiences are good. Some are unfamiliar. You hear these exotic, sorts of tunes, but played by guitars. And then the boat keeps rowing in history and time, but also in space. There's all kinds of poetic ways of thinking about it. And then you hear a familiar voice again for the first time.
Yeah.
And it's not you singing. It's not the hero singing. I think the hero hears this and there's something oh, I know who that is. They've lived a life. They've had experiences without me, but they're about to bring me back home. We're about to sing that song again together.
This is what I was looking for. Yes.
Yes. And so I think we are hearing this be sung over there by somebody who is now unburdened, who is now freeing herself or himself and yourself. And it sends you into this flight of lifting yourself like wings. And of course, we return to the song that they once sang together in all of its glory, right? In just a few measures.
Yes, and I'm now going to risk getting in trouble with all the pianists and Chopin scholars in the world. The two bars of the immediate return, which I haven't played yet, I often feel are almost like the two singers of the opening who are hocketing, or whatever the word is, where they're singing each other's phrases. I'll do it as an exaggeration as two singers. This is all one singer.
It's our hero tenor, sudden for the first time, while our little, beautiful Belle is singing her thing. Da 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 da. That's when they start singing together again. Yes, it's the most beautiful opera scene ever composed. And the duet comes back. I love what you said, because it's not notated that way, but somehow musically in a Bachian compound melody kind of way, it is there.
Yeah, the way a violinist will play on one string, da 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 da, expressively. Yeah, exactly. Now, also, I would like to encourage those listening who want to play this piece. One other flaw I often hear in performances of the Barcarolle, and probably including my own earlier, is that when this tempo primo comes back, you're so excited by what happens is that you go faster than the beginning. It's hard not to. I'll try to show you what it's like when you're sort of a 20-year-old piano student. It feels so good, except you're going to be in a lot of trouble in the next tempo relationship.
Well, that's kind of what it feels like when you're having your first romantic experience, when you're whatever, late teens, early 20s too.
Right.
So anyway.
Exactly right. And that's why this piece is good for all ages, because it works at all ages. However, I find that if you can keep this very much in the original tempo and just not let it go forward, that when the piumoso comes with the climax, whoa, it really is just tremendous, whereas...
And yet it's still PG. It's still a Disney movie in the sense that for Liszt, this would have been an erotic sex scene if Liszt had been writing this part. Something is so wholesome.
It's joyful and ecstatic at the same time. Yeah. Wow. Very
You know
good.
what I mean? Those Hungarian rhapsodies are
they're
pornographic. I mean,
they're
at times
they're salacious. Yes,
They-
and they're supposed to be.
the clothes
Yeah,
are
of course.
off for
Yeah.
those, but
Oh, and Chopin gets quite suggestive sometimes himself.
sure, but only suggestive. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, and I remember I was talking to Hans Graf, the conductor, when he was music director in Houston. I played a Chopin waltz, the E flat, the big first one, for an encore, and we were talking about the genius of the piece, especially the coda. You know, we were walking back to our dressing rooms, both very excited about music, and one of us mentioned how isn't Chopin awful when he's transcribed for other instruments, you know, violins or worse yet, organs or something. And he said, well, there's a good reason for that, is because Chopin's genius with melodic writing counts on the diminuendo of the piano. He says, but when you can actually put it on a violin or an organ or a cello or whatever, he said, it takes it from being suggestive into turning into pornography, because you actually see the clothes off then.
interesting. Wow, it's like the piano is like parental controls.
But keeps it, because Chopin is always suggestive. He's never blatant, and powerfully suggestive, mind you. And then, if the Dolce sfogato is the greatest part of the piece that made me first love it, this tempo primo is the most painfully moving, because in tempo primo, he gives you the material of theme group B. And after all this PG joy, suddenly it's PG still, but there's all this incredible Chopinesque pain and anguish, yet not an entirely tragic context. So there you have that. Expands it even farther. And I do know from various Russians who have told me that it's rumored that Rachmaninoff once said that these next three bars, 107, 108, 109, were harmony school for him. Because if I play it slowly, does it not sound like Sergei himself? Not like any one piece of Rachmaninoff, but the flavor is so, I mean, it's just so rich. And then he comes in bar 110 to a very rude sforzando on the downbeat, and doesn't say do a beautiful, gorgeous diminuendo like most people do in the next run. And I remember the first time I heard Horowitz play it, and he actually kept that fortissimo up through that whole thing, I was grossed out. I thought the right way to do it is to really do it beautifully. And he actually did what was written. How strange. I really feel that this cadence at this point in this piece it's very forceful. And as you know, one of Garrick's favorite things is the fact that Chopin, the most elegant of composers, loves to drive his cadences often, not in a pretty way. Not. Very often he does that. I think that's very much of a bel canto opera thing too. But I have this thing in bar 111 that we've had this incredibly intense, I'll take your word, hero's journey, right? This thing. Suddenly oh, we're just back where we were at the beginning. We're back in the same canal. And it's like, do you remember when we were young? Before all this life happened. And what could be more elegant than this?
and I don't want to be heteronormative about this. Maybe I'm thinking about me and my wife here, but you can think about something else, and somebody who's single, or polyamorous, or whatever you are, or maybe it's not even a human. It's your own journey through the unfamiliar, through struggles, and then a return to something that was once familiar but now transformed into a higher plane of contentment, existence. I hope everybody feels that during their lives in different ways, in different stages, and in different spans of time, in whatever form or format, with whoever and whatever. So it doesn't need to be any one thing, but I'm sitting here just like I'm gonna text Sasha the moment we get off this call and tell her I love her, But
Ben, that's genius, because that's one of the reasons we love great music, because it can bring us great life experiences which maybe we haven't even had. Think of an operatic singer who's very successful, who is, let's say it's a great tenor who's really great. He's either the incredible hero who slays dragons, or he's the beautiful poet lover in Paris who seduces a beautiful young woman, or he's this or he's that. Most humans aren't all those things, but they become them while they're doing it, and we have those feelings.
Music is sort of the great vehicle of vicariousness.
Oh yeah,
if that's a word.
Before we go any further with this wonderful thought, I'd just like to come to the last bars of the Barcarolle.
Oh sure, yeah.
Very often Chopin comes to an end of a piece and he gives you a cadence. So he has... we're coming to the end. And it's over, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like a good Mozartian or a good Shakespearean theater piece, not quite. We're going to have a little last comment, maybe Shakespeare, right? And that is the story of the hero's journey, or this is the story of the lover's so-and-so, and we hope you enjoyed it. And then he ends it with a flourish and a formal ending. That's all. In other words,
that's right. This was narrated. This story was told to us.
Yes, and the narrator now steps forward and says, I guess this is once upon a time. And now...
Wow, because I used to be so disappointed by the ending. I love the run, but I didn't get the final. Yeah, I was like, what's that about?
Well, think of it. I take this metaphor more from theater, especially Shakespearean style theater, as you experience it in England. At the very end of it, and we are the wiser for it, and the curtain comes. That's our show, folks. Good night.
That's right. It's a kind of the applause has already begun.
Curtain, yeah. And I find that Chopin sometimes does a very formal ending this way. I would suggest in 3 of the 4 ballades, no, 2 of them. And that is all. Mm-hmm. And that is all. Because I often hear in the F minor ballade, for example, and I'm not criticizing people. I, the narrator, Chopin, has taken you as far as you can go, and now I've told you my story, and that's the end of it. And what I also don't care for in that piece, or the 3rd ballade, is trying to pump up those last chords too much. In other words,
that makes so much more sense now, and actually it also brings more light on the introductions. The introduction to the G minor ballade too. Now that must be a narrator's sort of like, and now I'm going to tell you this story,
Yep.
And
that's an incredible story. Yeah.
Right, and there it's like, okay, and that's the end. The F minor ballade now has new meaning because its narrator gets pulled into the story.
That's true. Yes,
it's in the same way our gondolier, I guess, gets becomes pals with the hero and his lover.
Not only the gondolier, but also the way the bass sometimes recedes and then participates and drives the action and follows the action. Yeah,
it's just the peak of art.
I would say so. Yeah,
Well,
And also, of course, I just watched a marvelous masterclass of Paul Lewis at the San Francisco Conservatory, and somebody played the F minor ballade from him, and he just said, just because he's got a room full of students, that this and the Barcarolle and the Polonaise Fantasy for me are the most profound Chopin works, and that's fine. I couldn't agree more. Nevertheless, the Barcarolle wears its profundity much more lightly than the other two pieces do.
If it has a claim to the throne, to the great, as we kids call it, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, if it's got to be that spot, it's because of what you just said. The heart isn't fully on the sleeve.
Right.
And I guess to the extent that we find the highest art to be the art which is endlessly subtle, endlessly layered, it's going to be the pieces that veil themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
That are going to always reward even more and give you even more treasures. So.
Yes. I mean, of course, look, there is so much great art and we spend our life happily with it. When I first got to hear Così fan tutte when I was young, I thought it was enchanting and it was light and it was fun. And it is. It absolutely is. But as you get to know it, there's a lot more in there.
Yeah.
And yet it doesn't ever say, I'm bleeding. It's not melodramatic at all. So anyway, it is incredible.